English grammar and spiritual awakening. So if we were born in this country, we were born, most of us, not all of us, speaking English, learning words that meant something in our experience, and then we learned to think in those words. We weren't born with that capacity, but we learned to do that. Once we learned language, we could do it without moving our lips, and we could do it in our head, right? So we think in English, and therefore the thought process, that thinking with which we encounter the world, is filtered, you can say, through the structure of the English language. So in very, very simple terms, we could have a sentence like, I see a cat, right? So we have a personal pronoun I, we have a verb see, and we have a noun or an object, the cat, right? So it sounds ridiculously simple. And if you're already bored, I understand. But I would suggest at this point that how that language is structured can significantly affect the way we look at the world and ourselves, because we're seeing it through that structure that is that affects how we think about ourselves in the world. And I would also suggest, even more dramatically, that a sentence as simple as this, I see a cat, contains within it all of the elements necessary for the entire spiritual journey. If we understand that one sentence in all its depths, we will get to the bottom of the spiritual awakening question. So there's some potential here. Okay, all right. So the first thing, just like to sort of soften up the way we look at how language is structured, because we just, if we grew up learning and thinking in English, we tend to see it that way, and sometimes just seeing it from another perspective just helps to loosen up our conviction in the meaning and reality of words, which, at the end of the day, are concepts. Words never rise above the level of concepts. They will always be less than reality, right? Words are composed of letters in English. Each of those letters has no meaning in themselves, but you put them together in a certain number of letters into a word, and that word is given a meaning. But the word and its meaning is really a concept at best about something that exists, right? Something that is in our experience, something that has a form, or something that we can imagine. But it's important to note that the word itself is never other than a concept, a mental construct about something, some aspect of reality that we may experience. And that's okay. I mean, the words are helpful for communication, but they may get in the way if we're trying to really understand the depth of what this life is about. So let's just take a few examples in some other languages. So French, Spanish, Italian all have all the nouns in those three languages all have gender. So all the nouns are either masculine or feminine. In German, they add a third gender, just a neuter gender. So in German, there's three genders. So let's just consider the word water. In French, it's feminine. in German, it's neuter. So I would just imagine that when a native French-speaking person views a body of water, let's say a lake, um, is there a tendency to see it more as sort of a life-giving force, as a feminine noun? And if you were a German looking at the same lake, with a neuter gender, would you tend to see it more as I don't know, more utilitarian function, possibility for drinking water or recreation or something? Okay, in French, the word for mountain is feminine. In German is masculine, right? So would a French mountain climber relate to the mountain in the same way a German mountain climber would? Maybe not definitively, but would there be a tendency to relate to the mountain differently? Okay, I just see it as a potential. In English, we don't have genders. Old English used to. We just sort of dropped it along the way. So just that aspect of playing with the interrelationships between words doesn't happen in English. In ancient Chinese and to a large extent in current Chinese languages, there's not meaningless letters used to compile words, but they're actually pictograms that are often visually descriptive of whatever the word stands for. Like the word tree might have, a vertical line for a trunk and a few angled lines at the bottom for roots and few other lines for branches. It can also be combined together to create sort of a more complex meaning. So, for example, in ancient Chinese, the pictogram for spiritual awakening is seeing absence, right? Seeing absence. So, if that was, if those were the words that we were using to seek enlightenment, would it change our journey? Right? If we were investigating seeing absence, would that whole investigation look different than if we were seeking enlightenment, awakening, right? With all its associations of experience, high level of bliss, revelation, which are all outward seeking movement, sort of seeking the object of our experience, versus this pictogram displaying seeing absence. The other interesting thing I've found in ancient Chinese is that virtually all words can be used either as a noun or a verb, right? In English, we have a few words that can be used that way. One that came to mind is the word plant. So you could say, I see a tomato plant. Plant is a noun. Or I could also say, I am planting tomatoes. So it's used as a verb that way. So we have a few words that can be used both ways, but most not. In Chinese, they all can. So it's very fluid that way. So, for example, if we were thinking about the English word like body, like my body, it's a noun. There's no movement there. It's not a verb. You can't say, to body. It's just so it gives the sense of a more static structure that somehow is more malleable to our mental control, right? So we can more easily assume that it's not really the one doing everything. It's really me, whatever that is, and the body's sort of somehow subservient somehow. in service to the mind and who I think I am and what I think I want, etc. Okay, so just a few more grammatical examples, and then we'll move on. I really just want to loosen up our certainty about words are the final statement on something. So I've mentioned this example before, but it's such a good example I couldn't resist. So in Tibetan, there's no word for unworthiness. So if there's no word for it, does that concept exist in Tibet? And the answer is no, that without that word, that concept, that enveloping concept that we can easily recognize in English, since it's not part of their culture and they don't have a word for it, that feeling, that constellation of feelings can't exist there. And a similar thing in our culture that does exist, that many people experience, is this term depression. And what we can find when we look for depression is we can find, a number of very particular feelings, sensations, maybe, thoughts that are happening about our situation or, our energy level or whatever. But when we look for depression itself, we can't find it. We can't pinpoint it anywhere in the body. It's just this constellation of various feelings and thoughts. And so we can see the feelings and thoughts, but without the word depression, that concept of putting all of that together under one umbrella doesn't exist. Okay, so in this country, we do have that word, and therefore that condition exists because it is acceptable as a concept. Okay, one more example. In Aboriginal Australia, the language there, they don't have a word for left and right. So we obviously do in English. It's a bit confusing because if you're facing someone talking to them, my right is your left, and but in Aboriginal terms, they talk about my northeast foot or my south hand, depending on where they're facing. So one has to wonder, how just that one difference in describing their position of their body, how does that change one's relationship to the earth and feeling at home on the earth and connected with the earth? When we use the term left and right, it has no bearing on the earth itself, other than very egocentric position of where we happen to be standing, relative to me. So I mean, just these little differences in language, I suggest has quite a dramatic effect. Okay, so the point of talking about this is to just suggest that language itself and how we use it and how we think about it and the structure of it affects how we view ourselves and our position in the world. Okay, so back to our ridiculously simple sentence, I see a cat. Okay, so just in this sentence, we have this word I, the subject is having some action taking, he's seeing an object. So, but when we really start looking at it, this pronoun I that we use a million times a day, it is far more mysterious than we ever imagined. We take it to be the subject of whatever it is that's happening. Even when we don't use the word I, it's lurking there in the background, right? Because everything we think is what I think, and everything that we experience is what I experience. So whether we use the word I or not, everything that we're talking about is relates back to this um, concept of a subject, the subject of this activity, right? The, the personal self as the one who is thinking, doing, acting, right? Um, but it raises the question of exactly what that is. I mean, if we, talk about eyes, we can sort of casually think about, well, it's sort of my, body, mind, this entire structure. But when we think about the body, it's, um, on our mind, if there's pain or pleasure happening, or if we're needing to maintain it, right, feed it, um, fix some hurt, if we have a toothache, then we think about the body. If the body's, engaged in something that's, you know, quite pleasurable, we can be enjoying the body. Quite painful, we can be commiserating with the body. Um, but most of the time, we forget all about the body. Chuan Tzu had a beautiful little expression: when the shoe fits, the foot is forgotten. Right? Everything's going well for the body. We sort of forget all about it. We may still be walking around. We may still be driving the car, but we don't think, oh, this body is driving a car. So if we were sort of pressed to try to pinpoint where the sense of I is located, I think most of us would probably say, well, it's probably up here somewhere, up in my head. For more spiritually advanced, we could say, well, it's actually in my heart. It's interesting in uh, Chinese pictograms again. There's actually a combined um, pictogram for heart, mind, wisdom, without the distinction between the head and the heart. But going back to this sense of the location of what I take to be the thinker of my thoughts and the doer of my deeds, I think most of us might say, well, it's probably up here somewhere, up in my head. And, as we've talked about many times, what we can find is, um, memories and ideas and opinions and desires and fears and hopes and dreams and anxieties and regrets and all of that. What we can't find is a separate personal self. Most of us, you know, for a long time in our lives, probably never even questioned it. It was such an assumed part of who we took ourselves to be in this culture that we never even questioned it. We never thought to even look or even ask the question. But when it's suggested that to find out who actually is running the show, um, when we sit down to meditate and try to find what that is, or just walking around, um, we think that we've, sort of made a mistake or didn't quite get the point of the exercise because we can't find this separate individual entity that's in charge. We know that all of these activities are happening, some conscious, most of them not. Most of certainly almost all of our bodily functions, and how thoughts actually arise, and the chemistry of emotions, and all those is entirely unconscious. But there's a few activities that we could say happen within our consciousness. But what we don't find is an entity that is managing it. We may think we do, but then we're talking about thought. We're not talking about some entity that is the thinker of that thought. So when we really go to looking for it in earnest, on a sustained effort, what we don't find is a separate personal self in there. It sounds weird, and every feeling in us feels like, no, there's something here. I know there is. I just can't find it. But that's odd, isn't it? I mean, if someone says, point to your foot, you don't have a problem, or point to your hand or your nose. But if they say, point to you, the best you can do is point to your body or your head, and hope the questioner is satisfied with that. But when we really try to get to the depth of it, what we can't find is the thinker of the thoughts, and we can't find the doer of the deeds. We think we should be able to. It's a bit disturbing to imagine that there's not that there. So what I'm not saying is that there's a personal self and it's spiritually a good idea to try to get rid of it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there never was one. So it's not that we have to get rid of a separate self that's hanging on for dear life. I'm saying that it is purely an idea that we presume that is how things are. The subject of our sentence, I, that's who it is. We can't pinpoint it, but I know it's in there somewhere. Okay, so I think, deep down there's a certain uncertainty that we have in this not standing on firm ground, even if we don't recognize it. And the consequence of that is that we're always trying to protect it. We're always trying to protect or improve or polish our personality, our being in the world, how we present ourselves to each other, our, keeping up a good face, all of that is, I would suggest, all based on an effort that deep down we know that we're standing on quicksand, that there's nothing actually solid there. So we have to defend it, we have to defend who we think we are, and that can be easily rattled, if someone is, more eloquent or more certain or maybe even more aggressive than we are. We can be easily diminished, humiliated, embarrassed, and run off and try to put ourselves back together again. Okay. But if we actually recognize that there's nothing there to protect, well, there's no problem. That's actually the freedom of it. Okay, so this I is a presumed entity, even though we use it conversationally, it's fine, it's not a problem. The problem is that when we repeat it over and over again, we tend to believe it. We tend to believe that there actually is something solid there. Okay, so that's the subject of the sentence, I. And then, in English grammar, every sentence has to have a verb, so we have the verb to see. So even that raises questions like what exactly is seeing? And to recognize that what we are looking at, what we are experiencing, is for all of us experienced through a veil of our conditioning and past experiences in life. So everything that's gone before tends to color the way we see the next thing, the next experience. So the same event for two people may, one hand might be excitement for one person, might be fear for another. You know, what might be interesting for one person might be boring for another. So the same experience, depending on everything that went before, all of that conditioning, all of those experiences which were largely happenstance, accidental along the way, affects how we experience things now. So again, it's not bad, it's just the way it is, but it's helpful to know that, to recognize the degree to which that conditioning plays into how we experience everything. Okay, so subject, verb, and then we have the object. Um, in this case, in our little sentence, a cat, right? So we think, well, at least that is certain, at least we know a cat is there. Well, not exactly, right? Um, let's take another example that might make it more clear. Let's take a mountain. Let's take Mount Everest specifically. So this is a proper name. We've named the mountain. Everybody knows what it is. And by labeling it, we've sort of fixed it. We fixed it in a place and size and shape and everything. But I mean, if we really look at it, what exactly does that represent? I mean, is it, you know, just those words, Mount Everest is a fixed thing, a noun, doesn't imply movement or change. It's just Mount Everest. It's always Mount Everest. But when we really stop to think about it, okay, but where exactly does it start? I mean, is it in the foothills? Is it in, you know, all of Nepal? Is it in North India? I mean, where does it start? You know, as the ground gets higher from the ocean? I mean, where exactly does it start? You know, does it include the glaciers on the mountain or just the rock? You know, is it the bedrock or the loose rock? I mean, does it include the atmosphere that's interacting with the mountain and anybody's experience that was on the mountain? The atmosphere, you know, those powerful atmospheric changes that are caused by the mountain, is that part of the mountain or not? We can see there's a much more fluid thing. Even the mountain itself is growing every year just by the, you know, stupendous geological forces that are moving that whole subcontinent and forcing this enormous mountain higher in the air. You know, so it's not a static thing at all. But once we put a label on it, then that label tends to define it in our mind. We know what it is. It's Mount Everest. Okay, and you know, we do that with all words in a way. Limit the reality of whatever it is that the word is referring to. Even the word cat, you know, is a generic term. It's not my cat. It's not this specific cat. You know, it's not the utter mystery of, you know, my experience of being with that cat. You know, that cat aging, that cat playing, that cat, you know, stalking, that cat, you know, just always changing and experiencing life as a, you know, just wondrous manifestation of creation. You know, the word cat doesn't come close to it, right? It's a convenience. It's a convenience to communicate, which is fine, but it also tends to, you know, once we start believing that those kind of words actually represent reality, we tend not to see reality. We tend to think about reality, and we tend to trust what we think about more than the reality itself. You know, so the words become our touchstone. Okay, so just in our simple sentence, just this concept of I separates us from what we're doing. The seeing, it separates us from the object. It's I. It's separate. There's the sense of it's in here, and everything else is out there. Right. That's basically how we treat that when we think about I or me. And so we've created the situation where we've actually separated ourselves from reality, and then we get into spirituality and we try to figure out how to put that back together. How can I realize unity? How can I realize unity? Noun, verb, object, right? We're back in the same game again. I, as a separate being, want to do something, realize some objective that I've named as a fixed state, this thing called unity. Right? You see the power of just that sentence structure, just, pronoun, verb, object, but it, sort of channels the way we think about things into looking at the object. So we don't question what this I is, when we seek or see or do, or that's just sort of something we take for granted, something that we're capable of. So we presume the I, we're, convinced that we're in control of this doing aspect. And then the only thing that's left that's really a mystery is just this object out there, right? So I see a cat, the only thing of real interest is the cat. The I part, we ignore. Seeing, well, that's just a natural thing we do. And then what's left to investigate is the cat. So we're always looking outward, right? This is what science does, right? They're always looking at the object, investigating that, slicing and dicing and, looking at how it's composed, etc. But not considering, not all scientists, but nearly all, ignore this most fundamental fact that all of that research is happening the only place it can ever happen, and that is in consciousness, right? So but we ignore that. That's so universal, it's not of any interest. What's of interest is the object. The problem with the object, like the mountain, is not that the mountain doesn't exist. It just that it doesn't exist in the way we think it does. It doesn't exist as a fixed concept that we can pull apart and examine and then think we know the full importance of it. It just doesn't exist as we imagine it does. It also doesn't exist as a separate object in an objective world. We think it does. I mean, we look around and we imagine that we see all of these objects, right? But we don't, ever. We never actually see the object, any object. The only thing that we ever see is light reflecting from that object, being converted by our eyes, transmitted to our brain, interpreted, reconstituted, and there's awareness that registers the reconstructed image. That's what we actually see. The only thing we ever see, all of us, is awareness and the image that the awareness is aware of. That's it. We don't actually ever see an external fixed environment. We're not saying that it doesn't exist. We just are saying that as organisms, we have a limited number of senses to perceive what probably exists. Again, a little less certain, you know. But what we can know, and the only thing that we can know about that um, manifestation, that creation, is what is observed, witnessed, noticed by awareness in that flickering image that is always happening in the present moment. That's what we actually can experience. So this sentence structure where we separate the subject that is aware of, not as a personal self, but as awareness, and an object that's not seen directly, but is noticed through the capacity of our sensory systems. But the interface between the two is the awareness and what appears within that awareness. Just that, not even an interface, it's the same phenomena seen from both sides. One side is the awareness, which is open and receptive, and the other side is the appearance, whether a visual appearance or hearing or thought or taste or touch, or etc. However, whatever signals are body-mind is picking up. You know, without the body-mind, we have no capacity to know what's happening in our environment, and the body-mind has a limited number of portals to experience that are different for us than, say, for dogs or bats or fish or shrimp or eagles or whatever. We have a particular set of sensory capacities, but what everything has in common is that awareness and what arises within that happens always in the present moment. You know, the only moment we ever experience. So we have these, two perspectives. One is this absence that we talked about before, seeing absence, right? An absence which we discover is what we essentially are. It's an absence because we didn't find it when we went looking for our personal separate self. There's a presence there, but it feels more like an absence, like absence of content, not absence as in void, null, absolute darkness, not that kind of absence, just absence as in absence of content, but totally capable of noticing whatever content may be present. So there's this absence, and then the entire creation of the world and our body, mind, thoughts, feelings as the presence of that creation. It's just where those two meet is and can only be in the present moment. And that's the absolute freedom and beauty and privilege of this life. To recognize that which we essentially are is already free of whatever constraints or self-limiting thoughts that we may have about ourselves. What we truly are is an absence, an awareness fully um, conscious, aware of everything that happens, just without the without the judgment and self-criticism and all of that. Just open, because it's just awareness without attributes, just an absence that is fully conscious. Big enough to receive whatever manifestation is presented to us. And we all do that already, right? This isn't something that we achieve. It's something that we realize is already happening. It is what we all are already doing. We just believe that what we are is limited to this particular body-mind with this particular history, thoughts, limitations, etc. But what we can discover when we look and find out that there is actually not a separate entity managing this particular body-mind, what we find instead is that that awareness is far vaster than that. Not our awareness, not our personally generated awareness. It's just awareness. The awareness, the one awareness, animating this particular body-mind as this body-mind and as everyone and everything else is as well. So perhaps we can see just in this one simple sentence, the entire spiritual journey is contained. If we dare to look at it deeply, follow it to its very source, and it's all there, and it's all our direct experience now. And the only way we miss it is by refusing to look, refusing to investigate. I remember when I was maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something like that. And when I go to bed at night, I'd start to think, maybe there's something lurking under my bed. I better check. Sometimes I try to go to sleep without doing that, and that wouldn't work. I'd have to, okay, I better go check. I look under the bed. Nope, nothing there. Okay, now I can go to sleep. But there's a similarity here in that we have to be willing to look. If we're not willing to look out of some fear of what we might find, then we've got something hiding in the basement that we're not sure is there or not. Right? There's some uneasiness about who we really are, and the only way to dispel it is to look with a certain amount of courage, a certain amount of willingness to see whatever is there to be seen. The good news is that whatever we are is what we are. It is what we are already. So there's no danger of losing what we are. The only thing that's in danger of being lost is what we're not. But there can be a fear around that, like, well, I'm not sure, I'm not sure that's a good idea. I don't know what I'd be giving up. I don't know who I'd be without, my idea of myself, my belief that, I actually am in charge. I actually am what is thinking my thoughts. If you think you're the one thinking your thoughts, then you've still got some more meditating to do, before you realize that you're actually not in control of your thoughts. They arise from where? We can't quite say. And after a while, they subside back to maybe the same place, who knows? But we can see that we're not that entity that's the thinker of those thoughts. If we believe that we are, it can back us into a corner. So this is the value of really looking at what's actually present, what's actually living this life, and to do it with, like I say, a certain amount of courage, a certain amount of willingness to see whatever needs to be seen, a certain degree of self-honesty about what we know and what we really don't know, and that's what's needed. And it's there to be discovered. It's not far away at all. It's actually what you are already. Just a matter of discovering that.